Hi, welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, thanks for watching. Well, a big vote on Marcellus Shale is coming up, and guess what? Pensions and state union contract negotiations coming to a bitter end, a conclusion. Pennsylvania politics in depth and in detail, and guess what? It all starts right now.
This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers, a fast-paced, unrehearsed weekly discussion with and about the leaders who shape your world. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
Hi, welcome back to the program. Well, Matt Briette's going to be here a little later. We're going to chat with him about the union contract deadline, negotiations with the state, 75,000 employees or something like that, 16 or 17 union contracts up, and state pensions are back in the news. But first, sitting across from me is Terry Fitzpatrick. He's our energy expert. Used to be on the Pennsylvania Utilities Commission, and he's now president and CEO of the Energy Association of Pennsylvania. We're going to get to the aging infrastructure on electric and power generation in a minute. But before that, let's talk a little bit about the big vote that's likely in the Senate very soon, the State Senate of Pennsylvania on Marcellus Shale. It's somewhat controversial. The voters in the polls that others have done, including me, show support for it. Governor Corbin, he says maybe we ought to wait for a commission report. Frame that for us just a bit so that the viewers out there have a sense about it.
Right. Well, I think it starts with Governor Corbett during the campaign said he wasn't going to raise any taxes. Right. So that was his pledge there. But as you said, the polls seem to indicate that most voters want some money to come from these gas producers, particularly in light of the budget situation that we have. So most of the talk now is focusing on impact fees to provide some money for the local municipalities that are feeling the effects of the Marcellus drilling. There was a vote in the Senate Environmental Resources Committee this week on Senator Scarnati's bill to impose an impact fee.
Right, now, Senator Scarnati is not an unimportant player, to say the least. He's the president pro tem and was lieutenant governor for a while.
That's correct.
Go ahead.
That's correct. So that there were some amendments to that local impact fee legislation, but it was passed out of the Senate Environmental Resources Committee and could come up for a vote in the Senate. And there's also going to be movement in the House, I believe, on that same issue. Now,
the governor does, in a sense, have I'll say a way out, because he's put this commission together. They're taking a look at it. They're going to give a report in a couple of weeks, right. And they've hinted that they could have an impact fee, and the governor might accept that. Is that something you think, if the governor says let's wait till the commission gives its report, maybe they do in the fall, they work out, if they recommend it? That seems like a reasonable way to allow the governor to keep his commitment. He could then say, well, the commission recommends it, the legislature wants to do it, the voters of the state favor it. What is that a possible?
Well, the governor hasn't ruled out a local impact fee, but as you said, he probably would prefer for his Marcellus Shale Advisory Commission to come out with its report first. That's going to happen, I think, in the third week in July.
Right.
The trouble is the state budget's slated to be done hopefully by the end of June. Right. And politically, I think there's a lot of push to try to get some sort of impact fee in place in connection with the budget, because there's a lot of pain associated with this budget, with the cuts that are required.
That's a good point. Now, you made I thought also a very good point that it's not that there's a difference between an impact fee and a severance tax. A severance tax presumably would go back to the general fund.
Correct.
The governor has said can't go to the general fund, but he's willing to look at monies that would go to assist local communities because of the impact that the drilling has, and then maybe put a little money in the environmental fund.
Correct.
Am I right about that?
That's correct.
But the severance tax seems to be off the table. You would agree with that?
I believe it is politically. There are still some folks in the legislature favoring that, but I think everybody knows that the governor sent very clear signals he will not approve that.
Yeah. And as you accurately point out, the budget itself has become so contentious, not because there's a tax, but because Senate Republicans want to spend a little more than the governor does using the surplus. And so there's that big debate, and then they're rushing to get this deadline. I don't think the Republicans, well, not Democrats too, but I don't think the Republicans want to see this go beyond June 30.
No, there was a lot of criticism during the Rendell administration. Yeah. The budget was never passed by the constitutional deadline at the end of June. So the Republicans clearly want to be seen as having their act together and getting that done on time.
All right, we're going to run to a break. When we come back, we want to talk about this generation infrastructure. Do I got that right? Generation of power. This affects two big things. It affects safety, and it affects what you're going to pay ultimately. We'll be back with our energy expert, Terry Fitzpatrick, after we pay some bills. Back in a moment.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business, and by the Pennsylvania Cyber Charter School, bringing educational innovation and freedom to the children of Pennsylvania. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by ReconnectPA.org, supporting a comprehensive transportation funding solution, and by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Hi, welcome back to the program with Terry Fitzpatrick, our energy expert, a guy we call on from time to time. He's on the Pennsylvania Utilities Commission, probably knows more about this than I ever could know if I spent the next 10 years of my life studying it. All right. Hey, you brought up when we were chatting at break about this is just not some, confined, let's say, to natural gas price. Right. What's your point about that?
Well, the development of the Marcellus is important to Pennsylvania for a lot of reasons. I mean, the jobs that it's creating in areas of the state that were traditionally hurting is tremendous. But this development of gas in our backyard helps to keep natural gas prices to utility customers low, and I represent the utilities, as you know. It also helps to keep electricity prices low because the wholesale price of electricity is very dependent on natural gas because there's a lot of generation plants now built that burn natural gas. So it creates, the Marcellus creates jobs for Pennsylvania. It also helps to keep both our natural gas and our electricity bills lower than they would otherwise be.
All right, on this program, over the years, we've talked about this desperate need for infrastructure, roads and bridges. We've had folks on here who have talked about our problem that's huge, and I'm not going to belabor that point, but there is a relationship between the aging infrastructure for generation of electricity and for safety and for ultimately the price that we pay for electric power. What is your concern about the aging infrastructure with the generation of electricity?
Well, first of all, across the board, we have issues and problems with our infrastructure in this state and in this country. We have not done as much as we could to take care of it in a timely way. And we see that with roads and bridges, and you have people on talking about that. It's also an issue to some extent with energy and with all utility infrastructure. It's not, I wouldn't portray it as a crisis, but a lot of it's aging and it needs to be replaced. And that's true with the electricity grid, with poles and wires. With natural gas mains, and there's been a lot of attention to that. We need to get the bare steel,
isn't there
cast
a
iron.
Safety concern there?
Yes, we've had a couple of gas explosions in this state and around the country, one in California as well. That's really brought a lot of attention to gas mains and the desire to get some of the older mains out more quickly than we're replacing them now.
So your point would be it's first and foremost a safety issue. And then secondly, it does have some ultimate effect on the cost, the price that we pay for when we get electric, whatever our supplier is.
There are a lot of reasons to modernize infrastructure more quickly. It affects the reliability of the service. There are jobs associated with replacing that infrastructure. And yes, in some cases, it's a safety issue as well. Wastewater is another area where we need to put more money into our infrastructure. So we, along with the water and wastewater industry, are pushing some legislation that would allow utilities to recover their costs of this more quickly than they can now.
I was just going to ask you, what do you think the solution is?
The solution is to be able to allow utilities to be able to collect these costs on more of a pay-as-you-go basis.
Right.
Everybody recognizes these costs are legitimate to recover through rates because that's the only way you can pay for them if you're a utility. Right now, you have to recover it through a base rate case. Which is a process that can cost a couple million in itself to go through. It takes 9 months to complete at the PUC. And the fact that you have to go through that to collect those legitimate costs raises your cost of borrowing because lenders are more reluctant.
An electric company that would go through this in order to
An electric, natural gas, or a wastewater company all have to go through that to collect those infrastructure costs. So we're pushing a plan, as happened with the water industry 15 years ago, to be able to collect these costs more on a pay-as-you-go basis in order to provide an incentive to replace infrastructure.
This is not exactly the best environment. I mean, we've talked a lot about this infrastructure, and I think anyone who looks at it understands this has to get done.
Right.
Both roads and bridges and the infrastructure that you're talking about, or we can't have a modern. I mean, cumulative effects for a modern economy, for businesses to come and. I mean, we can go through the litany of reasons for it. How optimistic are you in this environment?
Well, yeah, we're in tough economic times, but at the same time, Terry, energy prices are down. And so in that sense, it is a good time to do it.
Except for gasoline.
Except for gasoline, but as far as electricity and natural gas.
And there's competition now, and that's produced lower prices, right?
And the longer you put it off, the longer you put off doing these things, the harder the problem gets to solve.
Hey, great update. All right, we're going to talk about negotiations and pensions and school choice with Matt Briette from the Common Foundation following these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by Pennsylvania Credit Union Association. Pennsylvania Credit Unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, check out ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the State System of Higher Education. 14 state-owned universities. The state system is the largest provider of higher education in Pennsylvania. And by the Hospital and Health System Association of Pennsylvania, working towards a healthy Pennsylvania.
Hi, welcome back to the program with Matt Briette. He's the president of the Commonwealth Foundation. I want to get through a lot of stuff with you. All right, let's start with school choice. It looked like it has some momentum in the Senate. This is a private school choice bill, right? You could take a certain amount of money. We don't need to get into details. Go to a private school. The House of Representatives in the state doesn't seem to want to go along with it. They're pushing a tax credit for businesses that put money in and get scholarships. Where does that all stand, do you think?
Well, I think we've had some recent developments where the House is introducing some bills that look similar to what Senate Bill 1 has been, where all the action has been over on the Senate. Whether or not we have time, of course, the clock is ticking, less than 2 weeks away. The budget is due. If that's part of this budget, I don't know. It's going to be very difficult. But I think that the debate has moved over to the House, and I fully expect that it will get consideration this year at some point.
This year, probably. I mean, the sense is that it may get done in the fall.
That's correct.
Does the whole business of the tax credit, which is fairly popular, do you think that was put forward as an alternative or as a parallel piece of it? What do you think?
Well, Senate Bill 1, of course, included both the educational improvement tax credit and the voucher for kids in violent and failing schools. So as a targeted voucher. The House, by a substantial margin, I think there were only 7 votes out of the 203 that voted against an increase in the educational improvement tax credit that has enjoyed bipartisan support. Even during the Rendell years, it saw increases. So you did see that pass the House and the Senate. So they're sort of companion bills, but there's clearly more political will to go along with an increase in that.
Are you sort of surprised that in recent years, liberals especially have come on board? They're really big into charter schools. I think you would have, maybe not so much into school choice. Does that sort of surprise you?
Well, it's not. I think
particularly major African-American leaders, Cory Booker, do I got that right, in Newark, and folks like Anthony Williams and
Tony Payton in the House,
and Dwight Evans on charter schools. Does that sort of surprise you?
No, it really doesn't, because they see this every day. In fact, they tell us that they have parents coming into their offices every day as well saying, my kids are not getting a good education, it's not safe. And a lot of these Democrats, as you say, have been voting for higher spending, more rules and regulations on the schools. They haven't improved. We've seen generation of children that are trapped in these poor schools, and they're saying we have to give them an education lifeline. And so that's why I think the reality is confronting them, on a daily basis.
But I want to get on to a couple of other subjects, but there isn't any doubt that the problem in the legislature with school choice is primarily located in the House of Representatives. You agree there?
Yes.
More than the Senate.
Yeah.
One of the things that I've heard, and you're the expert on this, you can help me out, is that in rural school districts, there aren't a lot of choices for people to take the voucher and go somewhere with it, and to go to another school, and that may be one of the reasons why some Republicans that you would think might be for it are against it. Have you heard? Is that
Sure. And
what's that point?
Well, the point is that we have an education monopoly. It's very difficult for private schools to exist when parents have to continue paying their property tax increases and then pay tuition to a private school. We don't have an education marketplace. Some might say, well, we don't have liquor choice out there either, to throw in another topic, but how are they going to be able to access?
The liquor stores, right?
Right, but that's what happens when you allow for more choices and parents to take their education dollars. More opportunities will arise.
I want to get the pensions and I want to get to the school thing. We can do that in the next segment, which we'll run to a break in a minute. But I have to ask you, now you brought up the sale of liquor stores, where's that going? I mean, the voters overwhelmingly favor it, and it just doesn't seem to get any traction. The governor wants it. Some leaders do, but it somehow can't get that mix of people. Conservative lawmakers are worried about the spread of sale of alcohol. Union, obviously the commercial union doesn't, does that have any chance?
Well, I mean, yes, it does. I think because, as you know from polling, the public overwhelmingly supports this. They don't think that the government should be in the booze business. Lawmakers, of course, are looking at the dollars, and that's what their concern is, of course, plus the special interests that are involved. But I think because of the overwhelming public support, that this will get done. There is a study underway by the governor right now, an administrative study that's being done. We'll see that, I think, for the fall.
Well, we're going to run to a break. I want to come back and do the pensions and the negotiations with the unions. But before I do that, I had Governor Corbett on here, and we talked about it. He just says, for him, it's not even about the money. It's just that it's the wrong thing, he says, for government to do.
48 other states are not in the business like we are.
All right, pensions. States got a big pension problem. They did a fix. I think Matt's going to tell me it wasn't. It may have been partial fix, but it's not a permanent fix. We'll come back with that after we pay some bills talking about money.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by Highmark Blue Shield, changing the way health plans work for business with a variety of plan options for employers and more choices for employees. Information is available at highmark.com. Have a greater hand in your company's health. And by the Pennsylvania Healthcare Association, the future of long-term care.
All right, we're talking with Matt Briette from the Commonwealth Foundation. All right, let's talk about the pensions. Now, look, I'm a former state employee, Millersville University, so I'm in that pension system. I got to get that out. Full disclosure here on this program. We don't hide anything. Right. All right, the pension fix, they did one. The estimates were $59 billion in a pension liability at state pensions, two systems, the state education pension system and the state employee system. Now it's about 28 or 29 billion. You would say it wasn't a fix, right?
Oh, it wasn't a fix. It was just deferring our costs into the future onto our kids and grandkids because these are liabilities that are owed. You were promised that, Terry, that here was the benefit you would earn during
1967 when I started.
And these are things that we have to fulfill, and so these are some of the top lines that our taxpayer dollars are going to have to go to. But of course, there's no real political win for politicians when they say, we're paying off our unfunded liability. So they keep deferring and they keep underpaying the amount of money that needs to go into the investments to be able to make sure they meet those obligations. But you would certainly have been happy with the changes that they made for the vesting period where they went back to 10 years. Maybe it should be longer. And when they changed the formula so that the pensions weren't as generous. So you yes
were
and no. Yes and no. What we need to have is better parity with what the private sector is doing. The private sector is not on a defined benefit plan where we guarantee a pension payout after years of service.
Would you favor getting away from defined benefits, going to defined contribution
yes.
system.
What we should have done is go to defined contribution, where the employee owns the retirement,
right.
and the employer, that being the taxpayers, are done after they make a contribution. So this is a way that you remove the risk to the taxpayers that, well, we're going to pay for this. We're going to be paying higher school property
right.
taxes. More money from the state general fund is going to have to go towards these. And what they did last fall only delayed the problems and made them larger in the future.
Yeah, one of the things that sort of surprised me, just so everybody, we're on the same page here, that the employer makes a contribution and the employee makes a contribution. The employee contribution is fixed by law, the employer contribution similarly, but for several years, the beginning of this century, there was no employer
right.
because, you know, the stock market was booming.
Right. We had surpluses instead of deficits.
Yeah, but how could we have no contribution? Why didn't anybody think that what goes up comes down, and that?
Well, and that's the way that it works, is that when you're running surpluses, and in 2000, early 2001, right. we had over $10 billion in surplus in the pension funds. That's
so
when
nobody was worried
Well, that's
about
right. And that's why when you had the increase for lawmakers of 50% in the multiplier, 25% for public school employees, they said, well, we'll draw down on this.
And the lawmakers did better than the average state employee, right?
Oh, yes.
And
absolutely.
hold on. All right, we're going to shift gears here. I want to talk a little bit about the union contract negotiations. They're scheduled to, you know, technically the contract would run out June 30. There's, what, 17 unions involved and something like 70,
out of 19,
65, 70,000 employees. Pretty big deal here. What are the sticking points right now as you understand it?
Well, Governor Corbett has laid out a proposal that we would have a 4% reduction in salary, and then it would increase 2% for the following 2 years. He is also saying that there needs to be more parity with the private sector on the cost sharing in health care insurance premiums. So those are sticking points because, of course, that means
salary and health care.
Yes, salary and health care, those will be the sticking points. But we're talking about a $4.6 billion part of the budget because labor costs are significant, and getting these costs under control, like you've seen in other states, is going to be important.
Now, the lawmakers themselves on health care pay, what, 1% in the Senate and nothing right now in the House. Shouldn't they share?
Yeah. Absolutely. There needs to be greater parity in our legislative branch, as we see in the private sector as well. You know, 1% of salary is not indicative of health care costs, and of course 0% isn't either. So there needs to be changes on the compensation front for benefits in particular in the legislature as well. Yeah,
now we have about 30 seconds left. Do you think this is something that may be an unfair question for you as an observer, not as a participant? Are they going to get this done, you think?
Well, I think there's a lot of pressure to get it done given the last 8 years, but I think it all depends on Governor Corbett, and I think he's standing strong. We'll see.
Well, apparently our producers say they've invited SEIU to come on. We'll see if they do. We'll get some another point of view about this. But as always, thanks for the update.
Thank you.
All right, we'll see you next week for another edition of Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, stay well.